So today I would like to talk about ritual and respect for ritual in the Confucian tradition. So ritual is a difficult thing for Westerners to understand. If you've been to Japan or China, you'll see the extent to which things happen according to an expected pattern. In Japan, the formalization of everyday life is particularly clear. You don't have a business breakfast or a business lunch, for example. Lunch is lunch and must be done in certain ways with certain kinds of social chat, of which the object is to get to know each other, to form a relationship. So China pays particular attention to food, for example, and hospitality generally, and the food ritual is what brings people together. A round table is common, and numerous plates are shared. The fish is always the pièce de résistance, and there are loud exclamations when the fish arrives. The fish, the fish. So that is part of the ritual. Do we Westerners have any sense of ritual, or do we have any at all? Of course we do. We have ways of meeting each other for coffee, and there are rules about shouting, that is, buying somebody else a drink in the cafe or a bar or a pub. But these things are done casually, with a degree of improvisation and chance events. And the idea that it might not go according to script is part of the enjoyment. It's important to note that ritual is different from habit. Habit has been emphasized in the West as a useful way of managing one's behavior from Aristotle on, and the Stoic philosophers in ancient Greece and in Rome placed a great deal of emphasis on habit. One Roman Stoic philosopher, Seneca, wrote about anger management and suggested that the development of habits could eventually contain anger. So one should, he said, gradually control the external manifestations of anger, such as shouting, going red in the face, gesticulating, and so on. And eventually the internal phenomenon of anger would dry up. Cognitive behavior therapy in modern psychology has been compared to the Stoic emphasis on habit management. Manage the externals and the internals follow. That is the idea. But habit is about ourselves and our own self-management. It is very useful to cultivate good habits because after a while they become automatic and they make life easier because one doesn't have to think too much about choosing which way to go. It's because habits become automatic that they are so useful. Returning to Confucius, ritual, or li, L-I, is different. It is about other people. It's paramount in Confucian culture. The great Confucian scholar Tue Ming refers to ritual as a form of communication and self-expression. He also refers to it as a form of fiduciary community, meaning that the function of a ritual is to establish a cooperative form of community in which we trust, much like a convention, a custom which we are all used to. He contrasts it with an adversarial community. We might think that the Western capitalist community is one such adversarial grouping, or a grouping of forces which actually prey upon each other. So then, ritual binds people together And I suppose in comparison with the Confucian countries, we Westerners live in not so much a ritual-free society, that would be inconceivable, but we live in a society where there are comparatively few rituals, endorsed by all of us. And there's a willingness to break any social rules which exist. For example, breakfast is supposed to be breakfast, but somebody invented the idea of the business breakfast, where you actually do something allegedly constructive and you leave with an agenda of action items. Whoever thought of this innovation, the idea of the business breakfast, should be subjected to heavy penalties. But what is breakfast in the West? Well, anything you like, you eat what you like, you follow whatever diet you like, and you do it when you like. And many people complain about the breakdown of family meals in the West, as each goes his own way, cooks whatever he or she wants, and has it when they want. Older people in the rural areas of Australia will remember the times when the family would, after their meals, they would eat together first and then, according to certain rules, and then they would gather around the piano for a sing-song, because there was simply nothing else to do. This is all gone, because with modern communications, there are plenty of options, plenty of things to do, plenty of alternatives. So Westerners, like Miss Piggy in Sesame Street, are all about moi, me or I, what I want and when I want it. The emphasis on ritual in Confucian cultures helps mitigate that tendency and the destructiveness involved in everybody going their own way simultaneously. Analects 10.5 gives a description of Confucius' attention to the detail of ritual. And one can see here the discipline and care devoted to every aspect of his behaviour in carrying out the appropriate ritual. This is a description of Confucius himself. When he held the jade tablet, he drew himself in as though its weight was too much for him. He held the upper part of the tablet as though he was bowing. He held the lower part of the tablet as though he was ready to hand over a gift. His expression was solemn, as though in fear and trembling, and his feet were constrained, as though following a marked line. When making a presentation, his expression was genial. At a private audience, he was relaxed. You can see how much each aspect of his behaviour was rehearsed and controlled, as every element was designed to send a message of appropriateness, predictability, and a message which reinforced community values. So this solidarity with community values is expressed through the ritual, which, if handled appropriately, is recognised by all and seen as expressing common values and commitments. Throughout the behaviour pattern described above, there is an underlying respect, a deference expressed towards the recipient or other participants in the ritual. Even the control of facial expressions is acutely important, ranging from the placid to the animated. We in the West discuss body language and what it means, and everybody is aware of the significance of certain gestures. Certain gestures are completely obvious and we don't even need a science to explain them. But we do try to make a science out of the interpretation of body language and interpret people's attitudes via the study of their hand movements, their posture, or their facial expressions. So the importance of what Confucius is presenting here or exhibiting here in his own behaviour is really familiar to us. Even though what is described may sound like play acting, it may sound insincere. If indeed it is play acting, then it is play acting which has a value and builds a community, where there is general agreement on what play acting is required. A ritual is part play acting, but play acting with a sincere purpose. And if there is indeed a mutual understanding about this, it ceases to be play acting and becomes a community-building ritual. Then the ritual has meaning for all participants and is in no way a mere formalistic rehearsal of parts as in a play. Confucian ritual primarily involves duty towards one's parents, and this has many aspects. One involves celebratory duties, remembering birthdays and anniversaries. Another involves precedent, in that parents and the elderly in general should be allowed to go first in the distribution of food, for example, or in taking seats on the bus, to use a very practical example. When Singapore made a deliberate attempt to revive Confucianism in the 80s and 90s, using textbooks and the school system and involving the teaching profession, the giving up of seats on the bus was one example which I remember from the school textbooks then. There is also an obligation to treat parents with respect through consulting them over life decision matters and taking the advice on board with due respect and consideration. The way in which funerals are conducted is also an important ritual element, and respect for other ancestors equally requires sacrifices and rituals to be carried out. There is in Confucius a great emphasis on music in the way such rituals are conducted, and it was thought that music harmonizes the body and helps it to be tuned to the pattern of life itself as it unfolds. As with the ancient Pythagoreans on the Greek side, music was thought to give an insight into the deeper meaning of life, or the way in which life is formed, the pattern of the cosmos, if you will. There are many kinds of musical instruments mentioned in Confucius, going from stone chimes to the lute, and these all play a part in channeling our emotions into their proper courses. Music is a way of communicating with others, and again, like ritual, music is thought to build the community. It brings us into accord with the deep order of things. Confucius was apparently particularly sensitive to music and thought that some forms of music were more conducive to moral improvement than others. Quoting, the master said of the Shao that it was both perfectly beautiful and perfectly good, and of the Wu that it was perfectly beautiful but not perfectly good. That is in Analects 325. Certain instruments were appropriate for certain occasions, opening an occasion with bells and closing with jade tubes was thought to be an orderly way of approaching an event, approaching a ritual. He saw good music as reflective of human harmony. Benevolent human behaviour and the melodiousness of good music went together. So finally, in deciding whether the son who reported his father for stealing a sheep, which I mentioned before, an example we discussed in a previous session, in deciding whether that was right or wrong, or possibly even morally vain, Confucius is in no doubt that the obligation to parents takes precedence, and it is the predominant moral force in the Confucian society. It's strongly reinforced by ritual obligations, and ritual in Confucius seems to be mainly tied up with the obligation to parents, but also to rulers, to behaviour in their courts and so on. And the great effect of ritual is to bind people together in a harmonious interaction. The role of convention in human society is much studied. And Confucian convention is based on ritual, but ritual which is recognized and accepted and can be recalled as the standard if there is a case of defective behavior. Confucius is clear that there are standards in this matter, and he is here to remind us of what they are. Next time, we will talk about the ego, or the lack of it, in Confucius thinking. Thank you for joining me.